I'm Sarah, 30 years old. 3 years ago, I left my dream life in Seattle to come home and care for my dad after my mom passed away. I thought the hardest part would be the grief, but I was wrong. One day, I caught my stepmother switching my dad's medication, and not long after, I discovered she'd been exchanging messages with my own brother. When I stood up to protect my dad and my mom's treasured home, my brother slapped me across the face and tried to throw me out. That day, I realized the people I trusted the most had been secretly stabbing us in the back, and I knew I would never stay silent again. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and thank you for being here. 3 years ago, I was living what I thought was my dream life in Seattle. I was working as a senior graphic designer for a tech startup called Pixel Dynamics. I had this gorgeous downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, and I was dating Jake Morrison, a software engineer who looked like he stepped out of a Microsoft commercial. We were talking marriage, maybe kids, the whole white picket fence dream. Life was perfect, until I got the call that changed everything. Mom had been battling ovarian cancer for 2 years. Elizabeth Miller, though everyone called her Lizzie, was the toughest woman I knew. She'd raised 3 kids while working as the head librarian in our small Ohio town of Millbrook, population 8,000. Dad, William Miller, had been the high school principal there for 35 years. They were that couple everyone looked up to, married 42 years, never spent a night apart except when Dad served 2 tours in Vietnam before I was born. I'd been flying back and forth from Seattle every few weeks, trying to balance my demanding job with helping Dad care for Mom. Those flights were killing my savings, but what else could I do? My older brother Michael lived about 2 hours away in Columbus with his wife Jennifer and their twin boys, Tyler and Mason. He's a corporate lawyer at some big firm, makes serious money, drives a BMW, lives in one of those McMansions with the circular driveway. My younger sister Rachel moved to Denver after college and works as a veterinarian at an expensive clinic that caters to rich people's pets. When Mom finally lost her battle on a rainy Tuesday in October, something in Dad broke that I'd never seen before. This man who'd disciplined hundreds of teenagers, who'd faced combat, who'd been the rock of our family for decades, just crumbled. At the funeral, he could barely stand without help. He kept calling for Mom, forgetting she was gone, asking when she was coming home from the store. After the service, we all met at the house to figure out what came next. The Victorian had been in Mom's family for 3 generations. Her grandmother had bought it in 1952 with money from selling the family farm. It was beautiful but old, with original hardwood floors, leaded glass windows, and a wraparound porch that Mom had filled with hanging baskets of flowers every spring. Dad can't live alone, Michael said, loosening his expensive tie. Look at him, he's completely lost. Dad was sitting in Mom's chair, still in his funeral suit, staring at nothing. Maybe we should look into assisted living, Rachel suggested, her voice gentle but practical. There are some really nice places now. He'd have people around, activities, medical care if he needs it. Assisted living, I stared at her. Mom died yesterday, and you want to ship him off to some facility? Sarah, be realistic, Michael said. None of us can move back here. I've got the firm, Rachel's got her practice. You've got your whole life in Seattle. We can't just abandon our careers to babysit Dad. Babysit, the word came out sharper than I intended. That's what you call taking care of the man who raised us? Jennifer, Michael's wife, spoke up from where she was collecting casserole dishes in the kitchen. Sarah, honey, no one's saying abandon him. But there are professionals who know how to handle these situations. Grief counselors, geriatric specialists, people with actual training. I looked around the room, at the family photos covering every surface, at Mom's reading chair with her bookmark still marking her place in a romance novel she'd never finish, at Dad sitting there like a ghost of himself. This wasn't just a house. This was our history, our foundation, the place where every Christmas morning and birthday celebration and family dinner had happened for 3 decades. I'll stay, I heard myself say. What? Rachel looked up from the sympathy cards she was sorting. I'll take a leave of absence. Just for a few months, until Dad gets back on his feet. Michael laughed, but not the good kind. Sarah, come on. You can't put your life on hold indefinitely. What about Jake? What about your job? You're finally making decent money. Family comes first, I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I could feel the weight of what I was offering. This is crazy, Rachel said. Dad wouldn't want you to sacrifice your future for him. But when I looked at Dad, really looked at him, I saw something that scared me more than giving up my Seattle life. He looked vacant. Like the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation had just disappeared, leaving behind this hollow shell. It's temporary, I said, more to convince myself than them. Just until he's ready to make his own decisions about what comes next. Michael and Rachel exchanged one of those looks, the kind siblings share when they think one of them is being naive. But they didn't argue. Maybe they were relieved someone else was willing to step up. Maybe they genuinely thought I was doing the right thing, or maybe they just knew I was stubborn enough that arguing was pointless. Jake wasn't thrilled when I called him that night from my childhood bedroom. 3 months, he said. Sarah, I get that this is hard, but your dad has other kids. Other options. You can't just disappear from your life here. It's not disappearing, it's taking care of family. What about us? What about the promotion you've been working toward? What about the life we're building? I stared at the ceiling, at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck there when I was 12. Jake, my mom just died. My dad needs me. Can't you understand that? There was a long pause. I understand you're upset. I just think you're making emotional decisions that you'll regret later. Emotional decisions. Like caring about your parent was some kind of character flaw. What was supposed to be 3 months turned into 6, then 9, then a full year. Dad wasn't just grieving. He was lost in ways I hadn't anticipated. He'd forget to eat for days, then binge on nothing but crackers and peanut butter. He stopped answering his phone, stopped opening mail, stopped basic self-care. The house started falling apart around him. The roof leaked into buckets I had to empty twice a day. The furnace died in February, and Dad hadn't even noticed he was living in 40-degree temperatures. I threw myself into caretaker mode like it was my new career. I learned how to fix leaky faucets and program thermostats. I organized Dad's medications for his high blood pressure and diabetes into those little daily pill organizers. I cooked his meals, made sure he kept his doctor appointments, hired contractors for the repairs I couldn't handle myself. Mom's garden, which had been her pride and joy, was completely overgrown. I spent weekends pulling weeds and trying to save her rose bushes, crying more over the dead flowers than I had at the actual funeral. Michael and Rachel would visit maybe once a month, always with a list of complaints disguised as helpful suggestions. You're enabling him, Michael would say, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, billing hours even during family visits. He needs to learn independence. You can't solve his problems by doing everything for him. You're wasting your talent, Rachel would add, scrolling through her phone between conversations. This isn't healthy for either of you. You're both stuck in this bubble of grief. But they never offered to help. Never suggested taking Dad for a week so I could go back to Seattle and figure out my life. Never even offered to pay for the contractors or groceries or any of the endless expenses that came with maintaining an old house and caring for an elderly man. Just criticism from the sidelines, delivered with the kind of confidence that comes from not actually having to deal with the problem yourself. The worst part was watching Dad fade more each day. Some mornings he'd wake up confused about what year it was. He'd call me Lizzie and ask when dinner would be ready. Other days he'd be sharp as ever, helping me research contractors online or telling me stories about his teaching days I'd never heard before. The inconsistency was almost worse than if he'd just been consistently declining. Jake lasted 8 months before he gave me an ultimatum. We were on a video call. He'd stopped visiting after the 3rd time I'd had to cancel plans because Dad was having a bad day. Sarah, I need you to come home, he said, his face pixelated and distant on my laptop screen. We can't keep putting our relationship on hold indefinitely. This is temporary. It's been 8 months. 8 months of canceled plans, interrupted conversations, and you being completely unavailable. I feel like I'm dating a ghost. I looked around my childhood bedroom, at the boxes of my Seattle life I still hadn't fully unpacked, at the baby monitor I'd bought so I could hear if Dad fell in the night. My dad needs me, Jake. His wife of 42 years just died. He's struggling with basic daily tasks. I can't just abandon him. And what about abandoning me? What about abandoning your career? Sarah, you're 30 years old. You can't spend your prime years playing nurse to someone who... He stopped himself. Who what? Say it. Someone who might not even remember you're there half the time. The words hit like a slap. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because sometimes they felt true. On Dad's bad days, when he'd look right through me or call me by my mother's name, I did wonder if I was sacrificing my life for someone who wasn't even fully present to appreciate it. "I can't believe you just said that," I whispered. "I'm sorry, that came out wrong. I just mean, your dad has other children, other options. You don't have to be the only one carrying this burden." "It's not a burden. He's my father." "Sarah, be honest with yourself. When's the last time you did something just for you? When's the last time you laughed, or went out with friends, or even watched a movie that wasn't chosen specifically because it might help your dad feel better?" I couldn't answer because he was right. My world had shrunk to the size of this house, this routine of meals and medications and doctor appointments and repair estimates. "Come home," Jake said. "We'll figure out other arrangements for your dad. There are services, facilities, people who specialize in this kind of care." "This is my home," I said quietly. "No, it's not. It's your childhood home. Your real life, your actual future, is here in Seattle, with me." That's when I realized we weren't just talking about geography. We were talking about priorities, about what mattered most, about the kind of person I wanted to be. And sitting there in my old bedroom, looking at pictures of Mom and Dad on their wedding day, I knew Jake and I weren't compatible in ways that had nothing to do with distance. "I can't come back," I said. "Then we're done," he replied. And the screen went black. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Then I heard Dad calling from downstairs. He'd forgotten how to work the TV remote again. And I realized that maybe some mistakes were worth making. Michael and Rachel kept pushing their narrative that I was stuck, that I needed to get a life, that Dad would be better off in professional care. But honestly, despite the loneliness and the sacrifice and the growing pile of bills I could barely afford on my dwindling savings, I knew I was doing the right thing. Dad needed me, and unlike everyone else in our family, I wasn't going to abandon him just because it was inconvenient. But then Linda Morrison entered our lives, and everything got infinitely more complicated. I first heard about Linda when Dad came home from the senior center one Thursday afternoon with something I hadn't seen in months: a smile. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the activities program, had been trying to get Dad to attend their social events for weeks. I'd finally convinced him to try the Thursday afternoon card games, mostly because I was desperate for 3 hours to grocery shop without worrying about him. "How was it?" I asked, putting away groceries while Dad sat at the kitchen table, still wearing his good sweater. "Nice," he said, which was the most positive adjective I'd heard from him in a year. "Met a lady, Linda. She's a widow too. Lost her husband 2 years ago." Over the next few weeks, Linda became a regular topic of conversation. Linda this, Linda that. She was 55, worked as a nurse at Millbrook General, had moved to town after her husband died to start fresh. She was from Georgia originally. You could hear it in her voice, Dad said. This sweet accent that made everything sound gentler. I was cautiously optimistic. Dad was showering regularly again, putting effort into his appearance before his senior center visits. He'd started humming while he made his morning coffee, something he hadn't done since before Mom got sick. When he asked if he could invite Linda for dinner, I practically cheered. Linda Morrison arrived on a Friday evening carrying a bouquet of yellow roses and a peach cobbler that smelled like heaven. She was exactly what I'd expected from Dad's descriptions. Blonde hair in a neat bob, perfectly applied makeup, dressed in a floral blouse and pearls like she'd stepped out of a 1950s magazine. She had that kind of put-together appearance that made you feel underdressed even when you weren't. "You must be Sarah," she said, giving me a hug that smelled like expensive perfume. "Your daddy talks about you constantly. He's so proud of the sacrifice you've made to take care of him." Dad beamed, looking happier than I'd seen him since Mom's diagnosis. Linda fussed over him during dinner, making sure his water glass stayed full, cutting his meat when his arthritis made his hands stiff, asking about his teaching stories with genuine interest. She complimented the pot roast I'd made, asked thoughtful questions about the house's history, and laughed at Dad's terrible jokes in a way that seemed authentic. By the end of the evening, I was genuinely happy for him. This was what grief recovery looked like, I told myself. This was Dad starting to live again instead of just existing. Linda became a regular presence, She'd stop by after her hospital shifts, bringing Dad little gifts, a crossword puzzle book, his favorite peppermint tea, old movies on DVD. She'd sit with him on the front porch in the evenings, listening to his stories about Mom without that glazed look people usually got when elderly people repeated themselves. 6 months after they met, Dad asked me what I thought about him getting married again. I was loading the dishwasher when he brought it up, trying to sound casual. Just hypothetically, he said. If someone like Linda, what would you think about that? My first instinct was panic. It felt too soon, too fast, too much like he was trying to replace Mom. But when I looked at him, really looked, I saw something I'd been missing: hope. For the first time since Mom died, Dad was looking forward instead of backward. Do you love her? I asked. He considered this seriously. I loved your mother for 42 years. That doesn't just disappear. But Linda? She makes me feel like I might have some good years left. Like maybe I don't have to spend whatever time I have left just missing what I lost. They got married 4 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse. I stood as Dad's witness. Linda's sister Helen came up from Atlanta to stand for her. And Judge Morrison, no relation to Linda, despite the shared name, performed the service. Dad wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to my college graduation. Linda wore a simple blue dress and carried a bouquet of white roses. I tried to be happy for them. I really did. Dad was smiling again, taking care of his appearance, talking about future plans instead of just getting through each day. Linda seemed devoted to him, always asking about his comfort, his needs, his preferences. But something felt off in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it was how Linda's expression would change when Dad wasn't looking directly at her. In those unguarded moments, her warm smile would flatten into something calculating, almost impatient. Or how she'd make little comments about the house. This place is so old-fashioned, Bill. Don't you ever think about something more modern, something easier to maintain? Or how she'd hint, with increasing frequency, that I might be overstaying my welcome. Sarah's such a devoted daughter, she'd say to Dad while I was within earshot. But don't you think it's time she started her own family? A woman her age should be building her own life, not stuck taking care of her father. These comments always made Dad uncomfortable. He'd change the subject or mumble something about how much he appreciated having me around, but I could see the seeds of doubt being planted. Was I holding him back from fully embracing this new chapter? Was my presence making it harder for him and Linda to build their marriage? The real red flags started about 6 months after the wedding. I began noticing Dad becoming more forgetful again, more confused. He'd ask me the same question 3 times in an hour. He'd get lost walking to Miller's Hardware, a store he'd been visiting for 30 years. He'd struggle to follow TV shows that used to be his favorites, getting frustrated and asking me to explain plots that weren't particularly complicated. At first, I attributed it to age. Dad was 67, and everyone said the stress of grief could accelerate cognitive decline. But the pattern bothered me. He'd be sharp and alert on days when Linda was working double shifts at the hospital. When she was home, hovering over him, he'd become foggy and tired, napping at weird times, struggling with basic tasks. Linda was quick to provide explanations for every incident. It's normal aging, honey, she'd tell me with her professional nurse voice. My late husband went through the same thing. It's important that we start preparing for the progression. She'd taken over managing Dad's medications, organizing them in a complicated system of pill organizers that she claimed was more efficient than the simple daily containers I'd been using. She'd taken control of his doctor appointments, driving him herself and refusing my offers to come along. Because too many people in the room can be overwhelming for someone with cognitive issues. She'd even taken over managing his finances, sitting with him at the kitchen table every evening to go over bills and bank statements that I was no longer allowed to see. Bill asked me to handle this, she'd say when I questioned the arrangement. Financial management can be stressful for people with memory problems. But I started noticing that Dad's memory problems seemed remarkably selective. He'd forget conversations we'd had that morning, but he could recite baseball statistics from 1975 in perfect detail. He'd get confused about what day it was, but he'd remember the exact anniversary date of every important moment in his relationship with Mom. Then there were the mysterious visitors. Twice I came home from grocery shopping to find Linda quickly ushering strangers out the back door. Both times, she had explanations that felt rehearsed. Friends from work, she said the first time. Someone who got lost and needed directions, she claimed, after the second incident. But these weren't social visits. I'd glimpsed clipboards, measuring tapes, calculators. These people had the purposeful air of professionals conducting business, not friends dropping by for coffee. When I mentioned it to Dad, he looked genuinely confused. I don't remember any visitors, he'd say. Maybe I was napping. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when I returned early from a dentist appointment to find Linda in Mom's bedroom, going through her jewelry box. Not looking for something specific, systematically examining each piece, photographing them with her phone, making notes in a small spiral notebook. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she jumped like she'd been caught stealing. "Oh, Sarah, you scared me." She quickly closed the jewelry box, sliding her notebook into her pocket. Your father asked me to catalog some of your mother's things for insurance purposes. You know, making sure everything's properly documented in case of theft or fire." "Dad asked you to do that?" "Well, not specifically asked. But as his wife, I'm naturally concerned about protecting family assets." She smoothed her blouse, regaining her composure. "You understand." That night, I asked Dad about the jewelry cataloging. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "I never asked Linda to do that," he said. "I wouldn't even know why that would be necessary. Why are you asking?" I realized then that I was watching something deliberate and systematic happening to my father, and I was the only one who could see it. I called Michael first, hoping that maybe blood loyalty would outweigh his usual dismissiveness. "Mike, I'm worried about Dad. His memory issues seem to be getting worse, and Linda's behavior is concerning." "Concerning how?" He sounded distracted, probably checking emails while we talked. I told him about the medication changes, the mysterious visitors, finding Linda going through Mom's jewelry. His response was exactly what I'd feared, but somehow still disappointing. "Sarah, you're being paranoid. Linda's a medical professional. She understands Dad's needs better than you do. Maybe you're just having trouble adjusting to not being his primary caregiver anymore." "Mike, what if something's actually wrong here? What if Linda isn't who she seems?" "Listen to yourself. You sound like you're jealous that Dad has someone else in his life now. Linda's probably the best thing that's happened to him since Mom died, and you're looking for problems where there aren't any." I tried Rachel next, hoping she might be more receptive to my concerns. She wasn't. "Dad's getting older, Sarah. Memory problems are normal at his age. And honestly, maybe it's time to consider that he might need more professional care than you can provide at home." "Rachel, I'm not talking about normal aging. I'm talking about someone deliberately manipulating him." "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any actual proof, or is this just a feeling?" The problem was, I didn't have proof. I had observations, suspicions, a growing certainty that something was wrong, but nothing concrete enough to convince people who were already inclined to dismiss my concerns. That's when I realized I was completely on my own. I started paying closer attention to everything. I installed a small security camera in the living room, telling Dad it was for safety in case he fell when I wasn't around. Perfectly legal in my own home, and actually a reasonable precaution for someone his age. I started keeping a detailed journal of Dad's good days versus bad days, tracking patterns and triggers. I secretly photographed the medications Linda was giving him, comparing them to his actual prescriptions from Dr. Hayes. What I discovered made my blood run cold. On days when Linda worked late shifts, Dad was getting his regular medications, the blood pressure pills and diabetes medication Dr. Hayes had prescribed in the correct dosages and combinations. On days when Linda was home all day, the pills in his organizer were different. Different colors, different shapes, different sizes. I carefully removed a few of the substituted pills and took them to my friend Marcus, who worked as a pharmacist at CVS. He identified them immediately. Mild sedatives, anti-anxiety medication that wasn't on any of Dad's prescription lists, sleeping aids that would explain his constant fatigue. Linda wasn't just mismanaging Dad's medical care. She was actively drugging him. But that wasn't even the worst discovery. The worst was finding out that she and Michael had been in contact long before she ever accidentally met Dad at the senior center. I made the discovery by accident. Dad had been having trouble with his iPad, couldn't figure out why his emails weren't working. When I sat down to help him, I noticed he was still logged into his iCloud account on the device, which meant I could see his text message history. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Messages from Dr. Hayes' office about appointments, notifications from the bank, spam from political campaigns. But buried in the older messages were conversations that made no sense. Messages between Dad's phone number and Michael's. But the content was clearly not conversations Dad would have had. I scrolled back further to dates before Linda ever came into our lives, and found exchanges that made my hands shake. Target acquired. Read a message sent from Dad's phone to Michael's number, dated 8 months before Linda claimed to meet Dad. Widower, valuable property, daughter living with him might be an issue. Michael's response, perfect. Let me know when you're ready to move to phase 2. Remember, we split everything 60-40 like we discussed. The next message, sent a week later, phase 1 complete. He trusts me completely. Daughter suspects nothing. Ready to discuss timeline for property transfer. They'd been planning this for almost 2 years. Linda had never randomly met Dad at the senior center. She'd been placed there by Michael, targeted Dad specifically for his property and financial assets. And they'd been playing a long game that I was only now beginning to understand. I scrolled through more messages, each one more devastating than the last. Discussions about managing the daughter situation, references to medication dosages and compliance levels, detailed conversations about property valuations and the best timing for a sale. In one particularly chilling exchange, Linda had written, "He had a clear day yesterday, asked too many questions about the pill changes, may need to increase dosage." Michael's response, "Do what you need to do. We're too close to completion to risk exposure now." The most recent messages were from just 2 weeks ago. Linda updating Michael about Dad's increased confusion, Michael confirming that he'd found a buyer for the house, both of them discussing the timeline for moving Dad to a facility where he'd be properly cared for and they could liquidate assets without interference. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. My brother and this woman had systematically targeted, deceived, and poisoned my father for money. They'd turned his grief into an opportunity, his loneliness into a vulnerability to exploit. But more than that, they'd counted on me being too naive, too trusting, too focused on caregiving to notice what was happening right in front of me. They'd underestimated me. That night, after Dad had gone to bed and Linda was working a late shift at the hospital, I made a series of phone calls that would change everything. The first call was to Dr. Patricia Hayes, who'd been Dad's physician for 15 years. I'd known Dr. Hayes since I was a teenager. She'd treated our whole family, had been at Mom's bedside during her final days, genuinely cared about Dad's well-being. "Dr. Hayes, I need to show you something," I said when she answered her cell phone. "It's about Dad's medications, and I think you're going to want to see this immediately." We met at her office the next morning while Linda was working and Dad was at his weekly physical therapy appointment. I showed her the photos of the substituted pills, explained the patterns I'd observed in Dad's cognitive function, shared the text message evidence. Her face went white as she reviewed everything. "Sarah, this is elder abuse," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Medication tampering is a felony. We need to get your father in for blood work immediately, and we need to document everything." "Can we do that without Linda knowing?" "We have to. If someone is systematically drugging him, every day we wait increases the risk of permanent cognitive damage, or worse." Dr. Hayes helped me plan a strategy. We'd bring Dad in for what appeared to be a routine follow-up appointment, run a comprehensive toxicology panel and cognitive assessment, and document everything for legal purposes. She also gave me the name of an elder law attorney who specialized in cases exactly like this. "Tom Rodriguez," she said, writing down his contact information. "He's seen these scams before. Financial exploitation combined with pharmaceutical abuse. He'll know exactly what evidence we need and how to protect your father legally." The tricky part was getting Dad tested without alerting Linda. I waited until she was scheduled for a weekend double shift, then told Dad we were going for his regular checkup that Dr. Hayes had supposedly moved up by a few days. Dad seemed confused about the appointment change, but not suspicious. Linda had trained him to be passive about his medical care, to not question schedules or procedures. In some ways, her manipulation made my job easier. Dr. Hayes ran every test she could think of: blood work to check for unauthorized substances, cognitive assessments to establish his actual mental capacity, even a brain scan to rule out organic causes for his confusion. The results confirmed my worst fears and gave me the ammunition I needed. Dad had significant levels of non-prescribed sedatives in his system, enough to cause the confusion and fatigue he'd been experiencing, but not enough to be immediately life-threatening. More importantly, when Dr. Hayes conducted cognitive tests while Dad was in a clear state, his mental function was completely normal. No dementia, no Alzheimer's, no age-related cognitive decline beyond what would be expected for someone his age. Your father's memory problems are entirely artificial, Dr. Hayes explained as we reviewed the test results. Someone has been deliberately impairing his cognitive function with unauthorized medications. When his system is clear, his mind is as sharp as ever. She prepared a comprehensive medical report documenting the evidence of drugging and its effects. She also wrote a statement confirming that Dad was legally competent to make his own decisions when not under the influence of these substances. "Sarah, I have to ask," Dr. Hayes said as she handed me copies of everything. "Are you prepared for how serious this is going to get? Because we're not just talking about family drama here. We're talking about felony charges, criminal prosecution, potential jail time for the people involved." I thought about Dad calling me Lizzie on his confused days, about the fear in his eyes when he couldn't remember simple things, about the text messages planning his exploitation like he was a business opportunity instead of a human being. "I'm ready," I said. Tom Rodriguez was everything Dr. Hayes had promised. He understood immediately what we were dealing with and had experience with similar cases. Financial exploitation of elderly individuals, he explained, often involved multiple perpetrators and sophisticated planning. "The medication tampering is actually a common element," he told me during our first meeting. "Keep the victim confused and compliant while you arrange to gain control of their assets. Your father's situation fits a pattern I've seen dozens of times." Tom helped me understand the legal landscape. Linda, as Dad's wife, had certain rights and authorities that would be difficult to challenge without solid evidence of abuse. But if we could prove fraud and elder abuse, those rights would become irrelevant. More importantly, Tom helped me protect Dad while we built our case. He drafted new legal documents that Dad could sign during one of his clear periods when Linda was at work. A new will, a healthcare directive naming me as his primary advocate, and most crucially, a power of attorney that would revoke any previous authorizations. "The key is getting these signed while your father is demonstrably competent," Tom explained. "We'll need witnesses, notarization, and medical documentation of his mental state at the time of signing." We arranged everything for a day when Linda was attending a nursing conference in Columbus. Something I'd verified was actually happening, unlike some of her other claimed activities. Dr. Hayes came to the house as a witness, along with Tom's legal assistant and a notary public. Dad was sharp that day, alert and focused in ways I hadn't seen in months. When Tom explained what the documents were for and why they were necessary, Dad's reaction was everything I needed to know about his true mental state. "Someone's been drugging me?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with controlled fury. "My own wife? We believe so, yes. These documents will protect you and ensure that Sarah can advocate for your medical care and legal interests." Dad signed everything without hesitation. "I want to see the evidence," he said. "I want to know exactly what they've been doing to me." That evening, after everyone had left and the legal documents were safely filed with Tom's office, I showed Dad the text messages, the medication evidence, the patterns I'd documented. He read everything in silence, his face growing harder with each revelation. 43 years I spent educating children," he said finally. 43 years teaching them about integrity, honesty, doing the right thing, and my own son. He couldn't finish the sentence. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have figured this out sooner." "Don't you dare apologize," he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in over a year. "You saved me, Sarah. You saved my life, my dignity, everything. I'm proud of you in ways I can't even express." But I knew Michael and Linda wouldn't give up easily. They'd been planning this too long, and the payoff was too significant. The house was worth close to $400,000, and Dad had substantial savings from his pension and Mom's life insurance. We were talking about $500,000 in assets that they'd been counting on controlling. I needed to be ready for their next move. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Linda came home from her supposed conference with an energy I hadn't seen before. She was excited about something, barely containing her enthusiasm as she fussed over Dad that evening. "Bill, honey," she said over dinner, "I've been thinking about your birthday next month. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have the whole family together? Michael and Rachel, the grandkids, everyone?" Dad looked surprised. "That would be nice, I suppose. It's been a while since we all gathered for anything happy." "Exactly, and I was thinking." Linda glanced at me with something that looked almost like triumph. "Maybe it could be a celebration of new beginnings. You know, looking forward instead of always looking back." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't about birthday cake and family photos. This was the endgame they'd been planning. Over the next few days, Linda threw herself into party planning with an intensity that seemed out of proportion for a simple family gathering. She made calls to caterers, ordered flowers, even bought Dad a new outfit for the occasion. But more concerning were the other calls I overheard. Hushed conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. I caught fragments that made my stomach turn. "Yes, everything will be ready for Saturday. The family has agreed to an immediate listing. We'll have all the paperwork signed during the celebration." They were planning to use Dad's birthday party as cover for a hostile takeover. I started making my own preparations. Tom Rodriguez would be standing by with our legal documents and a sheriff's deputy who owed him a favor. Dr. Hayes agreed to attend as a family friend to provide medical testimony if needed. I even reached out to Uncle Frank, Dad's younger brother who lived in Chicago, and filled him in on everything that had been happening. Uncle Frank had always been the family skeptic, the one who asked uncomfortable questions at family gatherings. When I showed him the evidence, his reaction was immediate and furious. "Those bastards," he said over the phone. "Bill's been through enough without his own son trying to rob him blind. I'm driving down Friday night. Don't you worry, kiddo. We're going to end this." The morning of Dad's 68th birthday dawned gray and drizzly, which felt appropriate for what I knew was coming. Linda was up early, bustling around the kitchen with nervous energy, checking and rechecking arrangements that had already been confirmed multiple times. "I want everything to be perfect," she kept saying. "This is such an important day." Dad seemed confused by all the attention. He'd always preferred quiet celebrations. Cake after dinner, maybe a few cards, nothing elaborate. But Linda had insisted on a full production with extended family, catered food, and what she kept calling special surprises. Michael arrived first with Jennifer and the twins. I hadn't seen Tyler and Mason in months, and I was struck by how uncomfortable they seemed. Usually they'd run straight to Grandpa Bill for hugs and stories, but today they hung back near their parents, subdued and anxious. "Boys, go give Grandpa his birthday hugs," Jennifer prompted. But even her voice sounded strained. When I tried to talk to the twins, asking about school and soccer, Michael quickly steered them away. "They're tired from the drive," he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Rachel arrived next with her husband Justin, but without their kids. The children had other commitments, she explained when Dad asked where they were, but she wouldn't elaborate. Another red flag: Rachel's kids adored Dad, and she'd never miss a chance to show them off at family gatherings. The most concerning arrival was a sharp-dressed man in his 50s, whom Linda introduced as Robert Miller, claiming he was a distant cousin of Dad's who'd recently moved to the area. Dad looked genuinely confused by this introduction. "I don't remember any cousin Robert," he whispered to me when Linda was out of earshot. Robert carried a briefcase and had the polished appearance of a businessman. When I asked how he knew Linda, his answer was vague and rehearsed. "Through mutual connections in the medical field," he said, but he couldn't provide specifics when I pressed. The early part of the party felt like a performance. Everyone was trying too hard to seem festive. Conversations felt forced, and there was an undercurrent of tension that even the twins picked up on. They stayed close to Jennifer, playing quietly instead of their usual boisterous energy. We ate the catered lunch, opened presents that seemed hastily chosen, and made small talk that carefully avoided any mention of the future. But I could feel something building, like the atmospheric pressure before a storm. Then, just as Linda was bringing out the birthday cake, Michael stood up with a huge smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Before we sing happy birthday," he announced, pulling out a manila folder, "Linda and I have a wonderful surprise for Dad. My heart started pounding, but I kept my expression neutral. This was it. The moment they'd been building toward for almost 2 years. As everyone knows, Michael continued, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he probably used in courtrooms. This old house has become too much for Dad to maintain. The stairs are dangerous for someone his age. The upkeep is overwhelming, and frankly, the property taxes are eating into his retirement savings. Linda jumped in right on cue, her voice dripping with false concern. We've been so worried about Bill's safety. Just last week he got confused and left the stove on all night. What if there had been a fire? I knew for a fact that had never happened, but Dad looked uncertain, like maybe he was starting to doubt his own memory again. So, Michael said with theatrical flourish, spreading papers across the dining room table. We've arranged for Dad to move to Sunset Manor, one of the finest assisted living facilities in the state. Full-time medical care, social activities, no more worrying about home maintenance or safety issues. Rachel clasped her hands together with what looked like genuine relief. Oh, Dad, that sounds perfect. You'll have so much more support there, people your own age to spend time with. Dad looked around the table, confusion evident on his face. But I like living here. This is where your mother and I built our life together. All our memories are here. And those memories will always be with you, Linda said, reaching over to pat his hand condescendingly. But Bill, honey, you have to be practical. What happens when you fall and no one's here to help? What happens when the furnace breaks down again? Or the roof starts leaking worse than it already is? And Michael continued, talking right over Dad's attempt to respond. Since the house will be empty, we've arranged for it to go on the market immediately. Robert here is a real estate agent who specializes in properties like this one. Robert Miller opened his briefcase and started spreading out listing agreements and property valuations. The market is very favorable right now, he said in a practiced voice. We could list next week and probably have offers within days. That's when Michael turned to me with that cruel smile I'd been dreading. So, Sarah, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, pack your bags, loser. This house is going up for sale tomorrow, and it's time for you to finally get a life of your own. The room erupted in applause and cheers, like it was the most wonderful news in the world. Linda was beaming, clinging to Dad's arm possessively. Rachel was nodding enthusiastically, probably already calculating how much money she'd inherit. Robert Miller was arranging papers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. But Dad looked like he'd been slapped. His face had gone pale, and he was staring at the listing papers like he couldn't quite process what was happening. What about our trip to Yellowstone? He asked, his voice small and confused. Sarah said we were going to visit the places Mom and I went on our honeymoon. Michael laughed dismissively. Dad, you're in no condition for travel. Sarah's been filling your head with impractical ideas. Sunset Manor has beautiful grounds and activities specifically designed for people with your condition. Condition? Dad's voice got stronger. What condition? Linda chimed in with her sweetest voice. Darling, we've discussed this. Your memory problems, the confusion, the safety issues. This move is for your own good. Sarah can visit you any time at Sunset Manor. It really is for the best, Rachel added. You'll have professional care, medical supervision, people who understand how to help with age-related decline. The betrayal was breathtaking in its completeness. They'd turned a birthday celebration into an ambush, used Dad's own family as witnesses to legitimize what was essentially a legal kidnapping. And they were all acting like tearing an elderly man away from his home was a gift, rather than cruelty. I looked around the table at people who were supposed to love Dad, who were celebrating the destruction of his independence, like it was something to be proud of. The twins looked uncomfortable, sensing something wrong even if they couldn't understand what. Jennifer kept glancing at the door like she wanted to escape, but everyone else was playing their assigned roles in this performance of family concern. Michael stood up just as Linda was setting the cake down, that polished courtroom smile plastered across his face. Before we sing happy birthday, he announced, Linda and I have a wonderful surprise for Dad. He launched into his well-rehearsed pitch about how the house was too much to maintain. Dangerous stairs, endless repairs, heavy property taxes. Linda followed right on cue with her concerned nurse voice, telling a story about Dad leaving the stove on all night. Then came the part about the beautiful assisted living facility, and Robert Miller laying out real estate listing papers like a magician revealing a final trick. Finally, Michael turned to me, voice dripping with fake sympathy. So, Sarah, pack your bags, loser. This house goes on the market tomorrow. Time for you to finally get a life. The room buzzed with awkward applause and murmurs, but I stayed perfectly still, my fingers tight around my phone. That's interesting, Michael, I said evenly, because there's a small problem with your plan. Silence fell. Michael's confident grin faltered. You see, I continued, taking a step toward the front door. Dad revoked your power of attorney 3 weeks ago. He named me as his primary healthcare advocate, and he has stated, clearly, that he wants to remain in this house. Michael's eyes narrowed. That's impossible. He doesn't have the mental capacity to. I swung the door open, and in walked Tom Rodriguez, Dr. Hayes, Uncle Frank, and Deputy Wilson. Tom began introducing himself, but Michael's focus was locked on me. His jaw was clenched, nostrils flaring. You think you're clever, don't you? He hissed, striding around the table toward me. Always the martyr, always the hero. Before I could speak, he shoved me hard in the shoulder. My chair screeched against the floor as I stumbled backward into the sideboard, glasses rattling from the impact. Michael, Dad's voice cracked, but Michael didn't stop. I straightened, still gripping my phone. Michael's face twisted with rage. Then he slapped me across the face, hard, the sound snapping through the stunned silence. A hot sting flared on my cheek, but I kept my chin up. You can hit me, I told him, my voice steady, but you're not taking Dad's house. Michael lunged as if to grab my phone, but Uncle Frank was already moving. He seized Michael by the collar and yanked him back, nearly toppling him over a chair. Touch her again, Frank growled, and you'll regret it. Deputy Wilson stepped forward, hand resting near his cuffs. Sir, back away. One more move and you're under arrest. I turned back toward the table, ignoring the pounding of my heart. Linda has been drugging Dad. I have proof, video, photographs, lab results. And I have text messages between you two planning to sell this house behind his back. Gasps broke out. Rachel's face drained of color. Jennifer clutched the twins and ushered them toward the door. Linda froze, eyes darting like a cornered animal. I held up Dad's iPad and began reading aloud. Target acquired. Widower, valuable property, daughter might be an issue. Phase 1 complete. Ready to discuss property transfer. Michael struggled in Frank's grip. That's out of context. Tom didn't blink. Context won't save you from felony elder abuse charges. That's when Linda's composure shattered, and she screamed her confession for everyone to hear. Dad rose from his chair, steady, clear-eyed, and told them both to get out. The room went dead silent except for the sound of Tyler starting to cry. Even at 9 years old, he understood that something terrible was happening. Your father is a confused old man sitting on $500,000 in assets, Linda continued, her voice getting shriller. He was wasting away in this house, accomplishing nothing, contributing nothing. At least this way his money would go to people who could actually use it productively. Dad, who had been looking confused and frail throughout the party, suddenly straightened in his chair. The fog lifted from his eyes like someone had flipped a switch, and for the first time in months, I saw the sharp, decisive man I remembered. You've been poisoning me? He asked, his voice quiet but steady. Linda realized she'd revealed too much, but it was too late to backtrack. Bill, honey, I was just trying to help manage your anxiety. The pills were to help you feel calmer, more comfortable with necessary changes. Changes I never agreed to, Dad said, standing up slowly but steadily. Moving to a facility I never chose. Selling a house I never wanted to sell. Taking medications I never needed. Michael tried one desperate last strategy. Dad, you're confused by all this commotion. Remember what Dr. Hayes said about your memory problems. These people are trying to manipulate you when you're not thinking clearly. Dad turned to look at his oldest son with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment so profound it was almost physical. My memory is fine when I'm not being drugged, Michael, and I remember every conversation we've had about my declining condition and how I needed professional care. What I don't remember is ever asking for your help in selling my home or managing my life. Uncle Frank, who'd been quietly watching everything unfold, finally spoke up. Michael, I helped raise you after your father came back from Vietnam. I watched you grow up, saw you graduate law school, celebrated your wedding. Your mother loved you more than life itself." His voice was steady but filled with disgust. "She would be ashamed of what you've become." That hit Michael harder than any legal threat. I saw something break in his expression. The realization that his actions had consequences beyond just financial or legal ones. Robert Miller had been edging toward the door throughout the confrontation. "I was told this was a consensual family decision," he said quickly. "If there are legal complications, I can't be involved in any property transactions." "Wise choice," Tom told him. "I'd suggest you be very careful about vetting your future clients to avoid involvement in elder abuse schemes." Robert Miller practically ran from the house, leaving his business cards scattered on the dining room table. Dr. Hayes had been examining Dad during the chaos, checking his pulse and alertness. "William, how are you feeling right now? Are you experiencing any confusion or disorientation?" "I feel clearer than I have in months," Dad replied. "Like someone turned the lights back on in my brain." She nodded, making notes. "That's consistent with the medication clearing his system. Deputy Wilson, I'd like to take another blood sample to document his current state versus the samples we took last week." "Of course, Doctor." Linda was looking around the room desperately, realizing that all her allies had abandoned her. Michael was staring at the floor, probably calculating legal strategies. Rachel looked like she was in shock, processing the reality of what her brother had almost accomplished. "This is all Sarah's fault," Linda tried one last time. "She's been poisoning your minds against me, making you think I don't care about Bill. Everything I did was out of love." Dad stood up, moving more steadily than I'd seen him move in over a year. "Love doesn't drug people without their consent," he said quietly. "Love doesn't make plans to sell someone's home without asking them. Love doesn't conspire with family members to take away someone's independence and dignity." He looked around the room, taking in the scattered real estate papers, the legal documents, the family members who'd been ready to celebrate, shipping him off to a facility. "I want everyone who was part of this plan to leave my house," he said. "Now." Michael grabbed his jacket, his confidence completely shattered. "Dad, if you change your mind, if you realize you need help making decisions—" "I'll call my attorney," Dad interrupted, nodding toward Tom. "The one I chose myself, while I was fully competent and not under the influence of medications my wife was giving me without my knowledge." Jennifer had already taken the twins out to their car, probably trying to explain to confused children why Grandpa's birthday party had turned into such a mess. Michael followed them without another word. Linda tried one more approach, switching back to her sweet Southern accent. "Bill, darling, surely we can work this out. I made mistakes, but they came from a place of concern for your welfare. We can go to counseling, rebuild our trust." "No," Dad said simply. "We can't. You drugged me, Linda. You made me doubt my own mind, my own memories, my own ability to make decisions about my life. There's no coming back from that." Deputy Wilson stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller, I need you to pack a bag and find somewhere else to stay tonight. There will be formal charges filed, and you'll be served with papers in the next 24 hours. Linda's composure finally cracked completely. She started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustrated rage. "This isn't fair," she sobbed. "I gave 2 years of my life to that man, 2 years of taking care of him, putting up with his grief and depression and constant talk about his dead wife. I deserve something for that sacrifice." "You deserve whatever the court decides you deserve," Tom said calmly. "Which, given the criminal charges you're facing, probably won't be much." As Linda stomped upstairs to pack, the remaining guests began to process what had just happened. Rachel sat down heavily in Mom's old chair, looking like she'd been hit by a truck. "I almost helped them do this," she said quietly. "I was so ready to believe that Dad needed professional care, that Sarah was being overprotective. I almost helped them steal his home and his independence." Uncle Frank put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were manipulated too, honey. Michael's been lying to all of us for a long time." Dr. Hayes finished her examination and pulled me aside. "Sarah, your father's going to be fine physically. The medications Linda was giving him don't cause permanent damage, and his cognitive function should return to completely normal within a few days. But the psychological impact of this betrayal is going to take longer to heal. What can I do to help? Be patient, continue being his advocate, and maybe consider counseling for both of you." This kind of systematic abuse and family betrayal can be traumatic, even for the survivors. As the chaos settled and the guilty parties either left or were removed, I found myself sitting next to Dad on the living room couch. The birthday cake sat abandoned on the dining room table, surrounded by scattered legal papers and real estate brochures. "How long have you known?" Dad asked quietly. "About the drugging?" "Months." "About Michael's involvement?" "A few weeks." He was quiet for a long time, processing everything. I kept thinking I was losing my mind. There would be conversations I couldn't remember having, decisions I'd supposedly made that didn't sound like me. Linda would tell me I'd agreed to things I was certain I'd never discussed. That was the point. They needed you confused and compliant to make their plan work. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I considered this carefully. I needed proof. If I'd accused Linda of drugging you without evidence, she could have had me removed from the house entirely. She was your wife. I was just the daughter who everyone thought was being overprotective anyway. Dad nodded slowly. "You saved me, Sarah. My own son was willing to drug me and ship me off to a facility so he could sell my home. But you saved me. You saved yourself too, Dad. You had the strength to make new legal arrangements when you had the chance. You trusted me when it mattered." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the magnitude of what had almost happened. Finally, Dad spoke again. "What happens now? Now we figure out how to move forward. Linda will face criminal charges. Michael will probably lose his law license and might face charges too. You'll need to decide whether you want to pursue a divorce or wait to see how the criminal case affects things. And you? What happens to you now that you don't need to protect me from my own family?" I looked around the living room, at the family photos covering every surface, at Mom's reading chair where Rachel was still sitting, at the place where Linda had spread out real estate papers just an hour earlier. "I stay if you want me to. This is my home too, Dad. It always has been. Even though staying here cost you your job in Seattle, your relationship with Jake, your old life, those weren't the right job or the right relationship if they couldn't survive me taking care of family. I've learned a lot about myself these past few years. I'm stronger than I thought I was, and I'm good at protecting people I love." Dad squeezed my hand. "Your mother would be so proud of you." 6 months later, I'm writing this story from the front porch of our family home, watching Dad tend to the garden Mom loved so much. The legal proceedings are mostly finished. Linda pled guilty to elder abuse and financial exploitation charges. She served 4 months in county jail and has a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting Dad. Her nursing license was permanently revoked. Michael faced more serious consequences. He lost his law license and was sentenced to 2 years probation and community service. His marriage to Jennifer ended in divorce. She said she couldn't trust someone capable of what he'd done to his own father. He's tried to reach out to Dad several times, but Dad isn't ready for that conversation yet. Maybe someday, but not now. The most important thing that came out of this experience was discovering that Rachel and I still had a real relationship under all the distance and misunderstanding. The shock of learning how close we'd come to losing Dad woke something up in her. She visits once a month now, calls twice a week, and has started researching ways to move her veterinary practice closer to home. "I almost let them convince me you were the problem," she told me during her last visit. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you sooner. As for me, I've built a new kind of life I never expected. I started a freelance graphic design business, working with local nonprofits and small businesses. It doesn't pay as much as my corporate job in Seattle, but it gives me flexibility to be here for Dad while maintaining my own identity and purpose. I've also partnered with Tom Rodriguez to start an elder abuse prevention program. We do workshops for families, train healthcare workers to recognize signs of exploitation, and provide resources for people who find themselves in situations like mine. Turns out my experience, as painful as it was, has given me knowledge that can help protect other families. Dad's health has improved dramatically. Dr. Hayes was right. Most of his cognitive decline was artificial. He still has the normal challenges of aging, but his mind is sharp and his spirit is strong. He's even started dating again, a lovely woman named Margaret who works at the library where Mom used to volunteer. But this time, I'm watching carefully, and Dad is making his own informed decisions with full transparency about his medical care and finances. We've made some practical modifications to the house: better lighting, grab bars in the bathroom, a ramp for the front steps. Not because we're planning to sell, but because we're planning to stay. This house isn't just a building, it's our family's story. It's where Mom and Dad built their life together, where we kids grew up, where memories live in every corner. People sometimes ask if I have regrets about the choices I've made: leaving Seattle, ending things with Jake, putting my career on hold to care for Dad. The honest answer is no. This experience taught me things about myself I never would have learned otherwise. I discovered I'm stronger than I thought, smarter than I gave myself credit for, and more capable of fighting for what matters than I ever imagined. I also learned about family, both the family you're born into and the family you choose. Michael may be my brother by blood, but Tom, Dr. Hayes, Uncle Frank, even Deputy Wilson, who helped us that day, they became my chosen family when it mattered most. But the most important lesson I learned is this: sometimes protecting the people you love means being willing to stand alone, to be called paranoid or overprotective or naive. Sometimes love means making the hard choice to investigate, to question, to refuse to accept easy explanations when something feels wrong. Trust your instincts. If something feels off about how an elderly family member is being treated, if their personality or cognitive function changes suddenly after new people enter their lives, if family members seem unusually eager to make decisions for their own good, pay attention, document everything. Find allies among medical professionals and legal experts who understand elder abuse. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions or demand real answers. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for being protective of someone you love. And remember that sometimes the people who seem most concerned about an elderly person's best interests are the ones you need to watch most carefully. If you're someone who sacrificed your own plans to care for a loved one, know that you're not wasting your life. You're not being naive or throwing away opportunities. You're honoring one of the most fundamental human values there is: caring for the people who cared for you. The house is ours. The memories are safe. Dad is healthy and happy and making his own decisions about his life. And the family we've rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal is stronger than anything Michael and Linda tried to destroy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something beautiful in spite of the people who tried to tear you down. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it means standing against people who should be on your side. Have you ever had to protect a family member from other family members? What gave you the strength to do what was right? I'd love to hear your stories. Remember, family isn't just about blood. Family is about loyalty, love, and having each other's backs when the world gets dark. Choose your family wisely and never stop fighting for the people who truly matter. Until next time, take care of each other.